Today on Miss Pursuit, we're joined by Georgia Pellegrini, who is a chef, an outdoor adventurer, an author, and a TV host. We are going to be talking about all these things and the upcoming show Modern Pioneering that is going to air on PBS and the funding that they still need to get this on the air. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening in to another Miss Pursuit podcast. We have a special treat today. Georgia Pellegrini has joined us for a conversation, and I'm excited to hear some of the exciting things, some of the great things that are coming up for you, but also hear kind of where you've been. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, let's jump right in. I want to hear kind of how you got started in the outdoors, because you kind of have, and I say flavorful, because it's a little bit of here and there in your background. So tell the rest of us, tell us how you kind of got started.
Sure. Well, I was fortunate that I grew up on the same land that my great-grandfather lived on. So it's been in my family for 100 years. And I grew up fishing trout and eating it for breakfast with my dad. So in that sense, I think I had always a deep connection to the land around me. And my grandmother and my great aunt lived next door, and they knew the name of every plant on our land. And so I was always nature child in that sense. But I think, like many of us, life takes over and you start to think about career paths and college and whatnot. And, for me, I think I kind of moved further and further away from that initially as I thought about work and just sort of the path that you're oftentimes thrust into after college. And so, I actually ended up on Wall Street for a short time.
That's a big difference.
Yeah, which is far, far away from the way I'd grown up. And I think the silver lining is that it forced me to realize where I was happiest and what and that being close to the land and connected to it was really what mattered to me the most. And so I set out on a path to figure out how to get back to it.
Yeah.
And here we are, 12 years later, and I've been able to make a career out of it, which I'm very blessed to say. And so, I would say, in a sense, I was very fortunate that I did grow up with a lot of land around me and getting my hands in the dirt and foraging and fishing. But it's very common for life to sort of force you away from that. And so I think what I've learned and what my career has been about has been teaching people ways to get back to the land, both large and small. You don't have to have a big plot of land to interact with nature. And I think that's the fundamental thing that most people need to know, is that there's nature is for all of us, even if you live in a small studio apartment. So
I agree. I am very similar in growing up with a grandfather who had a huge garden and we were in the mountains all the time. We were fishing for catfish. We were fishing in the creeks up in the Alabama, eastern part of the Alabama mountains. And the stories that come from that history, passing it down, those are things that you can't replace.
That's true.
I appreciate the time that I had with my grandfather and with all of our extended family who would tell us those stories of the summers that the ground cracked because it was so dry, and the years that the crops all dried up, but also the years that were bountiful and that they were able to support the family and live off the land and grow as a family. So being able to come back to that, because like you, I was always in the outdoors, but I had a career in the medical field and enjoyed it and had a lot of fun doing it. But it made me realize that slowing down and enjoying the space around me and nature was truly where my heart was. So it's I can totally relate to that. And I think a lot of people can, right? I think that
Yeah,
they're,
I think it's our natural human instinct. And I think
mm-hmm.
even if it's not commonplace, I think when you experience it, something comes alive in you and you become hooked in a way that you don't just being walking down a city street.
It's true. It's very true. And luckily, all across the United States, we have, like you said, if you live even in an apartment or a condo or, right in the middle of the city, there are tons of public lands that you have access to. And so being able
Absolutely.
to forage there even or hunt or whatever your pleasure is out in the woods, you have access to that even if you don't have private property like others do. So
It's true. There's all kinds of community spaces. I'm a great example of that. I'm in Austin, Texas right now, and I don't have a lot of sunlight in my home. And so I have a community garden plot
mm-hmm.
not too far from here. And I love walking to it and being part of that community of people who love to grow things. So
Yes.
there's access to everyone.
What a great way, though, right now, especially, I think most people are craving community and being in the city and maybe not, especially when you move to new places and things like that, getting to have and meet people, having a community that are like-minded like that.
Mm-hmm.
A community garden is a perfect way to connect with others who love the ground as well.
Totally. And
Yeah.
that's what my third book is called Modern Pioneering.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what my new show is about as well. And the idea is that, even if you just have a patio or a windowsill or a garbage bag where you can grow 25 pounds of potatoes or
Right.
a community garden plot or a parking strip, there's so many ways, like you said, that it's accessible to you. You don't need to have a huge field in the middle of Montana.
It's very, very true. And for those who are not familiar with Georgia, Georgia is not only a chef and an outdoor adventurer, she's an author and a TV host. And so I'm excited to get to talk about some of these books that she's written, but also about this show that you just were talking about, Modern Pioneering. And I'm excited to hear the plans for it and what all is going to entail that. So give us a brief, your first book, was that Girl Hunter or Food Heroes?
That was my second. My first book was called Food Heroes.
Yeah.
And it was the story of 16 people that were living in different parts of the world that were devoting their lives to these food traditions. And a lot of them I had met along the way, being a chef in various restaurants in New York and France. And I found their stories really compelling in a lot of ways because they had chosen to follow their own passions as well. And they were living off the land in various ways. And so I got to travel and spend time with them and tell all of their stories. And then there's recipes, of course, mixed in. And that was my first book. And then my second book was called Girl Hunter. And it was my journey as a chef, going over field and stream in search of the main course and learning to hunt all of my ingredients and the crazy things that I cook up and the crazy characters I meet along the way and sort of strange situations I get myself in. But it was also an amazing experience in that I really dug into the experience of what it is to be an omnivore in this world and decide that if I'm going to eat meat, I really want to pay the full karmic price of the meal and have a meaningful relationship with my food. And, as a chef, I think it's always very interesting to cook with wild game and fish because, what you truly are what you eat. And, no animals taste the same, unlike feedlot animals, which all taste the same.
Yes.
So that was my second book. And from that emerged a lot of interesting opportunities. And one of which is I do these women's adventure trips now. I've been doing them for 10 years where women from around the world come and go on an outdoor adventure with me. And they make lifelong friends with one another over a shared common interest, which is the outdoors and experiencing it for the first time. And then my third book, like you said, is Modern Pioneering. And that really is a how-to guide. It's a recipes, projects, and skills to inspire people and empower them to live a self-sufficient life. And it teaches people that that the practice of manual, like what I call manual literacy, is the most important thing we can do as humans. And there are ways to do that every day, large and small, regardless of where you live and your circumstances. Whether it's just making seed bombs and planting things in abandoned lots, or making homemade butter in your little tiny kitchen in Manhattan. There are ways to roll up your sleeves and use your hands, which I think is just so important. And like you said, we're in the middle of doing a television show for public television around that concept and around that third book.
I think that was kind of a hook that drew me in. I'm a hunter. I've provided my family with wild game for the past couple of years. My husband has for longer than that. And my kids even jumped into it this year, and my son provided us with venison this year. So it's the thing that I take it because I love to cook and I love to share wild game with others who have not experienced that. The question I get the most is, well, what about the gamey taste? and you touched on that a little bit. Each species of game that we have taken and brought into our home has tasted different. And it truly is from the beginning to the end, a full circle process. It's what is your food eating? Where are they foraging? What types of food are they finding in their environment? How, when you process it, how are you processing it? Is it in a clean way? Are you taking care of it as you move it and put it into the freezer? And how do you care for that? And then also, how do you spice it? How do you prepare it for the grill or the oven or however you're going to cook it? And it seems very scary and intimidating to people. So I'm excited for people to hear how, whether they go back and get Girl Hunter or Food Heroes and hear the stories along the way, or they link into Modern Pioneering and because we all crave to do things with our hands, right? We all crave to go back to the beginning and be a solution and be the beginning of something. And so that's, like I said, what kind of hooked me in to reading more about you and your passion for this, because we could go into a big long spiel about real people, right? About the things that they stand for. And you can find out fairly quickly if it's real or not. And the more I dug into you as I was preparing for today, the more I saw that. And it comes out like your love for what you write about and what you speak about and what you want to share with the world. It's real. It's real, and it's a real passion. And I'm excited for other people to see that as well.
Well, I think this time that we're living in right now is an interesting moment, because I think it's highlighting and putting things in high relief, that more than ever, we really do need to be self-sufficient and really hone some of those skills that our grandparents' generation had. And it's really only been a generation since we've lost a lot of that knowledge and those skills. And, for 10 years, I've been just on my soapbox saying how important it is that we hold on to this knowledge and that we know how to do things with our hands. I say that so many people now have a college degree, but they don't know how to fix their own toilet.
That's true.
I just think that, we've somehow gotten wrapped up in the information highway and the virtual reality and social media. And that has a place in keeping us all connected, but it's not what we were meant to do as humans. And it's not what makes us feel the greatest joy and It's not what makes us feel alive. And so I think that this pandemic has forced us to all really look at that and think about the fact that this is an opportunity to get back to the things that are what make us human.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting time. We were, like I mentioned, we were in the middle of producing the show, and then we lost some of our sponsors because of the uncertainty created by coronavirus. And it was ironic that a show that teaches self-sufficiency would lose its funding during a time when it's needed most. But, we're in the middle of an Indiegogo campaign where we're raising the funding from our audience to help distribute it. And we're about 60% of the way there. We have about 39 days left to go. So I'm optimistic that we'll be able to raise the funding to distribute the show, because I think it's really needed right now. It's really content that the world will benefit from. And also public television, what's so great about it is that you don't have to afford cable. You don't have to afford Netflix. It's accessible to everyone, regardless of whether they can afford those things. And I think that's important in itself.
It really is, that you can take a whole family who could be sitting there learning about things from a grandfather generation all the way down to toddlers who are watching and learning. And, we're lucky. I feel very, very lucky that I had so much influence from a generation that could teach those things, right? But like you said, if we don't hold on to those, if you don't practice them, if you don't listen to the stories, just having a recording of my grandfather talking about how to grow tomatoes is a treasure. It is a treasure. And so being able to, and you kind of touched in on it in talking about food heroes, whether you are a hunter or a gatherer, whether you love to hike or you do backpacking trips into wherever you're going to hunt an animal, whether you are in the city, wherever you are, storytelling hands down and passes down techniques and these things that you learn that you can take with you and pass on to the next generation and keep it going. And I love how you said, social media has its place, but it's not a replacement. It is something that can be utilized, that can help grow, but it's not a physical, tangible application of these things. So storytelling is important, and that's kind of what you are doing. And that's what podcasting does. That's what TV does. That's radio, however you get those stories out there, it's then applied. And so with public television, being able to push this and introduce it into the homes of people like mine, where my kids love documentaries of how animals move and how they learn and how they grow and how plants grow, that's the generation that is really going to benefit. It's going to open up their world to things that they themselves have not gotten to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's very, very exciting to me. We will definitely post the link for on the podcast post. We'll put the link on there for people to help support that. But I challenge everybody, because like you said, public television, this is not like, you need sponsors. There's no commercials. There's no
commercials. It's not funded by anyone but individuals and brands and foundations. And that's what gives it a lot of integrity.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of cable shows are influenced by products. This is really uninterrupted quality programming that's truly educational, and that it relies really on the viewers to make it possible. So I always say to people, who are supporting our campaign, that $1 makes a difference, because it tells the algorithm that it's a campaign that's worth showing to other people.
Yes.
So
it shows the interest, it shows the need, but I also love seeing this world, this technical world that is deciding what is worth it, that this is something. You don't always get support for these kind of programs. And so it's great to see that support, that interest, and their purposeful drive for it to happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You don't often see any kind of hunting either on mainstream television.
No.
This will be a unique thing.
It really will. It really will. I kind of want to go back just a little bit, and I want to talk about food heroes.
Sure.
Well, you've done a whole lot of field to table, like you've worked with a lot of field to table, woods to table restaurants, food, putting it out there, things like that. How has that motivated each of your books and your cooking?
I think, I think that working in these types of restaurants have introduced me to, I think, unique ways to source ingredients. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the characters that I met in Food Heroes were a result of them coming into restaurants with ingredients that they had foraged, or olive oil that they had produced themselves from olive trees that they had grown and nurtured. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself much more intrigued by these people than I was by peeling grapes in the kitchen or whatever I was mm-hmm. doing. And so, I think that inspiration, in a way it reflected a choice that I had made, which was to leave my corporate job and follow something that I was passionate about. Yeah. And I find those stories always very interesting and compelling, especially when people have been able to make it work. And they do it because they're passionate about it, not because there's a bunch of money attached to it. And I think that's a really important way to live. It's the most soul-fulfilling way to live. And then also working at a lot of these kitchens. For example, when I worked at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is a well-known restaurant outside of New York City at a Rockefeller estate, I had to kill a turkey for the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And that was a watershed moment for me because, in a lot of these fancy restaurants, you don't really start from the beginning. Mm-hmm. You make these, fancy things in the center of big white plates. But the truth is that when you can really start from the beginning and, harvest the greens, collect the eggs, harvest the honey from the honeybees, kill the turkey for the kitchen, mm-hmm. You really respect the ingredients in a different way. And you treat them with integrity all the way to the plate. You waste nothing. And I think that's really sort of the philosophy of previous generations. You wasted nothing. You made mm-hmm. the best with what you had, and you appreciated it because you had to put a lot of blood and sweat and tears and hard work into getting it to your table. And so I think for me, it just reinforced how important it is that we roll up our sleeves, like I said, and seeing people do this, different food artisans do this, was inspiring for me. And it just sort of set me out on my quest to want to explore that further. And as a human, as an omnivore, and of course, as a chef.
I think that it brings it from restaurants into homes. It brings the ability to take something that is wild game that I had always heard and seen family members or friends, they would just fry it up or put it on the grill. But it really, the creativity that can come from wild game, you see sometimes in restaurants. It is exciting to see it more flipping into homes. And that's kind of what's great about having a cookbook or a show, that you can see it go from point A to your belly.
Yeah.
You get to see that storyline from the beginning to the end. And that storyline carries through from harvesting all the way to while you're cooking, you are remembering, or you're even having a conversation with the people around you in your home about that story of how this was harvested and take it into your kitchen, onto your cutting board. And like you said, you're not wasting because you know the effort that went into it.
For sure. And that was sort of the goal of my second book, Girl Hunter, where I had probably over 100 wild game recipes. And I was looking at the food, wild game, through the lens of a chef, where, wild game does get a bad rap sometimes. It's perceived as gamey, and that's because wild animals are athletes. They're not living in a feedlot. And so they run free. They have a lot of dense muscle tissue, not a lot of marbling of fat in their flesh. And so it was a challenge as a chef, but I wanted to make it more accessible to people who, for whatever reason, were turned off by wild game. I wanted to show them that there are things you can do with a little more effort to make wild game a wonderful, grand culinary adventure.
Yes.
And I think as Americans especially, we've gotten used to things all tasting the same. We've gotten used to the idea that going into a grocery store and getting a boneless, skinless chicken breast in a styrofoam packaging is going to taste the exact same each time that you buy it. But the truth is that that's not how we're meant to eat as humans. We're meant to eat a huge variety of fruits and seeds and nuts and animal proteins and vegetable proteins. And so we've kind of gotten used to this monolithic diet. But, the truth is that, there's incredible adventure and joy in eating when you really learn the variety that's out there and that's accessible to you. And so wild game is an opportunity for that. It's an opportunity if you learn to cook it properly, whether it's making sure that you age it well to get some of that gaminess out, or marinate it or brine it, or there's a whole bunch of things you can do. It really can be so inspiring and enlivening compared to just, eating another boneless, skinless chicken breast.
It's true. It's true. And the best way to introduce people to hunting or fishing or however is over a meal that you are partaking in. And it's relational because you are connecting with people. You are hearing the stories behind it, but you're also tasting something. I have 3 meals for venison that I go in between in introducing people to wild game. I think venison's one of the easiest ones because it is so similar to steak. And so you can always do a popper, which is very simple and yummy. Everybody loves bacon. Everybody loves brown sugar and a little bit of cream cheese and good jalapeno. And so that's one that is a staple. A bacon wrapped meatloaf is something that everyone requests when they come to my house. And a shepherd's pie, which kind of takes everybody back to that home, Southern, because I'm from the South, a good Southern warm meal for a cold day. And those 3 are kind of my staples on introducing people to wild game. And it's rarely ever turned away.
Yeah. I can imagine that.
But there's a sense of, there's pride in it because we know exactly where it comes from, but there's an appreciation that goes into it as well. And I think that people respect that enough to sit down and enjoy it with us. And it opens up conversation and it opens up acceptance, not just tolerance, but acceptance. I think it just grows us as a community to be able to do that. And food is such a perfect way to do that.
Yeah, I always say that people can disagree on just about everything, but everyone loves to eat.
Yes.
And so it's a great unifier, and you can break bread with people and usually, find some common ground that way.
It's true. I mean, here in the South, we always say, well, when you give birth, you bring food. When you die, you bring food. It is the beginning and the end of life. And it just surrounds grief. It surrounds celebration. the stories behind things in different parts of the world, it just connects you as a people group. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm right there with you. There's passion behind it. I love serving meals. It has not been as frequent now, but we have started back up. It's almost like every Thursday night we have somebody new at our house, and we are feeding them. Again, it's about connection, and I love how good food can do that. So,
Yep, absolutely.
yeah. Well, tell me, I want to also go back just a little bit and talk about the women's adventure trips.
Sure.
Can you give me, you said it started a couple of years ago. So tell me a little bit about how that began and how it has evolved over time.
Yeah, it started actually, hard to believe, but almost 10 years ago now. And when my second book came out, Girl Hunter, I'd often wake up in the mornings and have emails in my inbox from strangers. And the subject of the email would oftentimes be something like, I think you can help me. And they would, share their life story and ask if they could go on an adventure with me. And it was sort of a funny thing because I wasn't really planning anything like that for the general public. But I think for whatever reason, people, especially women, were resonating with my journey that they had read in my book, of the fact that I was on Wall Street, that I was unhappy, that I was looking for a change, and that I had just done something very drastic, and set out to, go to culinary school and then ultimately carve a career path that was fulfilling. And, I wasn't planning any kind of public adventure, but around that time, a venue reached out and asked me to do an event with them. And we kind of came up with this idea of doing a women's adventure weekend. And it was a Thursday to a Sunday. And the weekend was really about, I always joked, it was like, girls, guns, and butter, where it was,
the staples.
I taught them all of those things that were important, whether it was a lot of them, learned to hunt for the very first time. They learned to fish. They learned to cook. They learned how to field dress. They learned how to skin an animal, really take it from field to stream to table. And all of those, pioneer skills, so to speak, those skills that I think were important. And it was incredible to see so many of them just come alive and just transform. Many of them had never held a gun. Many of them have never been in the middle of a stream fly fishing. They had never, put their hands inside of an animal and pulled out the innards and butchered it. And it was interesting to see the transformation of nervousness and hesitation to absolute exhilaration. And, soon they were making jewelry out of the feathers, and taking it all home to do things with it. I mean, they really, were really committed to it. And I think, and I decided early on that I was going to do it only for women. And I made that decision because I think there are a lot of outlets for men, especially in the hunting space. And there were not a lot for women. And I find that I actually went to all girls high school and all women's college. And I've just always believed that women learn differently, especially from each other. And when it comes to the outdoors, I think that they experience it very differently. And of course, I've just noticed in the outdoor industry, so much of it is tailored to men, down to the way the guns are cut. And so, I just wanted to create an environment that was solely for women to unravel and not take themselves too seriously and support each other and cheer each other on. And, women can oftentimes be their own worst critics and self-edit. And so I wanted this to be an opportunity for them to just try something new with abandon. And what's happened in the intervening 10 years is that these women have created this network of lifelong friends. I've had them come from as far as South Korea, and they have reunions, which I think is so cool. And just to see the friendships form out of all of this, out of this shared love of the outdoors, has been just one of the greatest blessings of my career. And so I do it about, 1 to 2 times a year at this point. It's a lot of work and effort,
It is.
but
Yeah.
I do it because it means so much to people. And I often have said I was going to stop, but, there are riots every time I say that. So, I've continued to do it, and, it's been really special. And, actually we filmed one of them for this PBS show. So I hope if we are able to raise the funds, people will get to see an inside look in what it's actually like.
Good. Because I think, there are women's groups that are popping up all over to help support the women in the community. And it's, like you said, few and far between to find, like I say it over and over and over, I cannot reach my hand out within miles of me and find another woman that hunts. Fish, yes. Yeah. Hunting, no. And it kind of draws the circle in just a little bit. Tennessee and other states have done a great job of having these becoming an outdoor woman groups that are starting. I think it's very important, like you said, because it connects women together to teach skills, but also to just create relationships with women who that are like-minded. And there's a sense of strength that comes from it when you go in probably a little intimidated, a little anxious, very excited, and you come out, A, knowing a new skill, B, taking that skill from A to Z and being able to cook, process, utilize it for other things, but take it full circle. And when you come out feeling that accomplished, you hold your head a little bit higher. Whether you're a man or a woman, you hold your head a little bit higher. You find self-worth in places that you didn't know were there. And it kind of feeds the whole body, the soul. So these kind of events, there's, like you said, there are tons. If there are men listening, there are so many different ways that men and women can get involved in groups like this. You just kind of have to look for it. But it does create a safe environment for asking questions that you might not necessarily ask in a mixed gender situation, or allow feelings and emotions to come through so that you fully experience the weekend. And, men get together and hang out and they get to do the same thing. They don't have to be careful, and they can ask questions without feeling like an idiot. And it works sometimes to have the same gender in a group for just a little bit of time. There's just an amount of support that you can't find other places.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I'm a big believer in women getting together and finding ways to support each other in many aspects of life. And I think it's better to learn from other women in the outdoors and not have your spouse teach you to shoot. It's not good for marital relations.
No, we had one. I was learning how to drive a stick shift, and the best advice that was ever given to me was, do not let your husband teach you.
Yeah.
It saved our marriage.
No stick shift. No, don't teach them how to ski. Don't teach them how to shoot. All these sort of fundamentals.
It's really good to learn it from somebody else, and to find someone who is built like you, who thinks like you, who has emotions like you. Every woman is built differently. So having people who have figured things out that you can look at and say, okay, I'm 5'2". That person is about 5'2", 5'4". She's handling that rifle perfectly or that shotgun perfectly. How do I, tell me what works? What have you troubleshot, and what doesn't work? Why does it not work? And then cooking. All of our tastes are different, right? So
totally
being able to learn not just a single recipe, but being able to learn how to apply things so that you can take it home and become creative with it is something that when you are teaching people how to cook, if you can pass that on to somebody, you have opened their world.
Yeah, that's so true.
I love recipes. I love going by recipes, but the moment that I learned, and it caused my kids having allergies for me to step outside of that comfort zone, but learning how to create something without having a recipe becomes exciting to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about intuitive cooking.
Yes. But it did not happen without recipes. It did not happen without practice. It didn't have, I had to learn how a piece of meat or how a piece of fish or how a salad, how lettuce absorbs, all of these things. I had to learn it through recipes. So I think Modern Pioneering, the show, we're going to be watching it. It better get funded because I want to learn from it. I want my kids to learn from it. And so I'm very hopeful for you and for your team that it comes together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What are some of the goals for this year? I know that this show is a huge one, but what are some other highlights that you have coming up?
Well, it's interesting. Things really shifted when the pandemic emerged. Mm-hmm. But, we're going to be filming the show, and hopefully if we reach our funding goal by July 1st, then it will come out this fall. And so we'll be focused on that. And then I have one of my women's Adventure Getaways this September. And it's going to be pretty incredible. We'll be doing a fall turkey hunt as well as fishing in Maine.
Oh, beautiful.
Which is really magical setting in Maine. And that is, I think it's the third week in September. We had to move it because of the pandemic.
Right.
But it's still happening, which is great. And people can learn about that at my website, which is just adventuregetaways.com.
Okay.
And so, we're focused on kind of preparing for that. It's September 17th to the 20th. I just looked it up. Okay. And so we'll be doing that. We'll be doing, oystering and cooking classes and foraging. And so, yeah, I think, those are my two sort of main projects for this year.
They're big ones. Don't make light of it.
They are big ones. Yeah, exactly.
They're big ones.
And so, yeah, I think that's, I have I do a lot of speaking engagements and, other filming projects as well. But, for now, that's kind of my main focus.
Well, let's make sure that we get you funded. That's, I'm very hopeful, like I said, that it will come to fruition. And otherwise, they can start looking into Georgia, go get Food Heroes, go get Girl Hunter, go get Modern Pioneering. I know that you've got a couple things out on YouTube because that's where I found some.
Yeah, we do a lot of short form content on YouTube, which is fun.
Yes.
Some little segments from the shows.
Yes. So go check Georgia out. Go support. Let's bring this to public television so that it can be a positive light to self-sustaining lifestyles. It's not, hunters especially don't have a great rep with a whole lot of people. And so being able to kind of connect it all together in a positive light for not just cable buyers and app people that this is just regular people in their homes that don't necessarily have to buy their entertainment. It's a passion. Yeah, it's
available to everyone.
Yeah, it's a passion story behind it. So thank you, Georgia, for hanging out with me today. I really appreciated it.
My pleasure.
Okay.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you for listening in to the Miss Pursuit podcast. And thank you, Georgia, again for hanging out with us today. Go follow her on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find wild game recipes on georgiapellegrini.com. And let's go support, as hunters, this self-sustaining lifestyle TV show that is going to be given to the public on PBS. Let's support. I know that she still needs to raise a good quarter of the funding for this show, and I know that we as a community can help her out.